I stood near the far wall of the banquet hall, clutching my small gift bag like it was a shield. 73 guests, all dressed like they belonged in a magazine, spread silk gowns, cufflinks practiced laughter. The chandeliers caught every lie and made them sparkle. I wasn't supposed to be here. That thought looped in my mind as I watched my mother glide from guest to guest like royalty. My father held court near the bar with a circle of men I recognized from corporate events, business tycoons with permanent grins and expensive watches. And then there was Ethan, my brother the golden child, decorated, beloved, effortlessly magnetic. He stood at the center of it all, basking in their praise, like he hadn't ignored my calls for the last 3 months, like he hadn't left me off the seating chart entirely until someone must have reminded him that I existed when he finally noticed me. It wasn't a reunion. It was a performance. "Aurora?" he said, lifting his glass in mock surprise, his voice just loud enough to hush a few conversations nearby. Didn't know they let freelancers in with the real professionals. A few polite chuckles. I smiled thinly, tucking my hair behind my ear. "Guess not everyone can serve their company," he added, sipping his drink. I tilted my head. And not everyone has to be funded by someone else's trust fund to look impressive. It was subtle, almost too quiet, but it landed. The air changed. Ethan's smile faltered. And then he looked past me. I felt it before I saw it. My father's presence, heavy-heated. His hand closed around my upper arm. "What did you just say?" he asked. Low and dangerous. I opened my mouth, but I never got the chance to answer. The slap cracked across my cheek like a rifle shot. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Then his hand tangled in my hair, yanking me backward so hard my scalp screamed. The room blurred as I stumbled, heels slipping against polished marble. He dragged me toward the doors like I was garbage. I gasped, but the breath caught behind pain. My hands reached for balance, for mercy, for anything. I heard it next to the sharp, high sound of my mother laughing. Not out of shock, out of amusement, like this was theater. Then the applause. One person, Ethan. "You had it coming," he said, smiling as he clapped. Like he was proud. No one stopped him. Not one of the 73, not one hand reached for mine. They watched, they whispered, but they let it happen. Outside, the air was cooler, the night too quiet. My father shoved me once more and let go. I stumbled forward, caught myself against a stone column, and straightened. My scalp burned. My lip bled. My chest ached, not from injury, but from the shame that wouldn't stop blooming. I didn't look back. I walked toward the parking lot, my heels clicking against the concrete, each step heavier than the last, and my fingers already searching for my phone. I drove with one hand clenched around the steering wheel, the other gripping a wad of tissue pressed against my lip. Blood kept seeping through. The streetlights blurred past like witnesses too afraid to speak. My scalp pulsed where his fingers had torn through hair, and my cheek throbbed in rhythm with every heartbeat. But none of it was unfamiliar. This wasn't the first time, just the first time with an audience. I'd been shoved into walls before called ungrateful, told I was lucky to be fed. My father had always known how to weaponize disappointment. My mother how to disguise cruelty as refinement. And Ethan. He made a career out of ignoring me until it was time to prove his worth by comparison. When I was 8, I brought home a drawing I was proud of. My mother told me not to pin it to the fridge. It would clutter the kitchen. When I was 16, I got accepted into an art program. My father asked if it was a real school or just doodling with tuition. On my 25th birthday, I called Ethan. He didn't answer. Later, I saw photos of him celebrating at a rooftop bar with my parents. Tonight wasn't a betrayal. It was a summary. I pulled into my apartment lot, parked, and sat for a moment staring at the building. My hands were still shaking. My dress was torn at the shoulder. Fabric ripped in the same spot he'd grabbed. I took a breath, then another. Inside, I flipped the bathroom light on and met myself in the mirror. Swollen, lip-bruised, cheek-tangled hair. My reflection looked back without flinching. "It ends tonight," I said aloud. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out my phone. Scrolled past names I hadn't touched in years. Then I found it. Rachel called her back in school. She was the sharp one. Studied contracts for fun, argued with professors, and won. I once lent her a textbook when she couldn't afford one. That was a long time ago. I hit call. The line rang twice. "Aurora," she answered groggy. "It's me. I need help." A pause. "Talk to me," she said. So I did. Rachel met me at a quiet coffee shop off Main Street the next morning. She didn't waste time with small talk. Just pulled out a legal pad and waited. I told her everything from the moment I walked into the banquet hall to the second I slammed my car door shut and realized I couldn't keep pretending it was normal. I didn't soften it this time. I didn't try to protect them. And Rachel, she never interrupted, never flinched, just listened. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "We document everything." By the time I left the cafe, I had a list of next steps in a folder in my bag labeled evidence. I didn't know what healing looked like, but this felt like a start. That afternoon, I knocked on the door 2 floors down. Tom Harris opened it, already half expecting me. "Thought I might see you," he said, stepping aside. Tom had been my landlord for 3 years, the kind of guy who remembered to salt the sidewalks before a freeze and never asked questions about noise unless it sounded like danger. He used to be a cop. Now he worked freelance security gigs and sometimes quietly found things people didn't want found. I handed him the slip of paper Rachel had given me. Names, dates, a bank account number I barely remembered. "If there's anything off, I said I need to know." Tom took it, eyes scanning the list. "Off, kid. I can already tell you none of this is clean." That night, I sat on my bed, lights off folder in my lap, staring at the bruises on my arms and the glow of my phone screen. A message buzzed through from Rachel. "Start saving everything. This won't stay private." I read it twice. Then I opened a new album in my phone and named it Proof. Tom knocked on my door 2 days later, holding a manila folder that looked heavier than paper should allow. "Got something," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. He laid out the documents in quiet rows. Bank statements, wire transfers, emails with clipped subjects like internal shift and fund transfer authorization. I didn't understand the numbers at first. Then I saw the account ID. It was mine. "Your father's name shows up here," Tom said, tapping the second page. "And again here signing as trustee. The dates lined up with Ethan's promotion. With the new car my mother suddenly drove with the pictures of golf outings I'd seen online always tagged at the country club I never once stepped foot in. I picked up one document, a series of withdrawals over 3 years. The totals made my stomach twist. This was supposed to be mine. I said my education, my future, used it to grease wheels. Tom muttered promotion boards, donations to corporate foundations, even paid a publicist. All under your trust. He pulled out a printed email. The subject line read, "Ensure Ethan stands out." The body was short. His father was very persuasive. Rachel arrived an hour later, skimming through the pages with silent intensity. "This isn't just misuse," she said. "It's fraud. Maybe even laundering. We can go civil or criminal. Maybe both." I nodded slowly, but my hands were cold. The slap from my father had faded into a dull ache. But this was something else. They didn't just hurt me. They built everything they had from what was supposed to be mine. "I want it on the record," I said, voice low. Rachel didn't hesitate. "Then we start with exposure." And I knew exactly who to call next. The invitation came through a text from my mother. "Let's talk this through like family. Come by tomorrow at 3. No apology, no explanation, just that familiar tone. Soft enough to seem reasonable. Sharp enough to cut if I didn't comply. Rachel raised an eyebrow when I told her. "You're not going alone." But I needed to. I needed to see how far they were willing to go. Now that they knew I wasn't staying silent, their house looked the same. Too clean. Too perfect. The lemon polish, the floral candles. I stepped inside and time warped. The hallway still had that photo of Ethan at his first award ceremony. I wasn't in any of the frames. My mother met me with a smile stretched thin, pastel cardigan draped just right. "Aurora," she said as if saying my name gave her power over it. "Let's get to the heart of this." My father sat in the formal living room, a neat stack of papers on the coffee table. Ethan was there too, legs crossed, scrolling his phone like he didn't remember applauding while I bled. "We want to move forward," my mother said sweetly, quietly. My father added. He pushed the papers toward me. An NDA, a waiver of legal claims, a check tucked inside, visible just enough to remind me what silence was worth to them. "That's your idea of resolving this?" I asked. "You've made your point," he said, voice hardening. "Let's not drag this out." I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. A small black recorder poorly hidden near the lamp base. I almost laughed. They wanted to buy me off and trap me at the same time. I stood up, placed the papers back on the table. "You think this is about money?" I said quietly. It never was. My father's face darkened. "Don't play the victim." I leaned forward, meeting his glare. "I'm not playing anything. I came here to give you a chance. You had it. Now it's gone." My mother's breath caught. Ethan muttered something under his breath. I didn't stay to hear it. As I walked out, my fingers were already closing around my phone, and Lisa was already waiting for my call. I met Lisa at a small cafe near the courthouse neutral ground. Quiet enough for what we were about to do. She looked different than I remembered from college. Sharper, tired around the eyes, but still fast, still hungry. She slid into the seat across from me and took one look at the folder I'd brought. "This is everything," she asked. I nodded. "Video trust fund transfers. The rest is with Rachel." She didn't ask why I was doing this. She knew. She flipped through the pages with practiced precision, her face unreadable. When she reached the part about Ethan's promotion being funded through my trust, she let out a low whistle. "They are not going to walk away from this," she said. That's the point. By the time I left the cafe, Rachel had already released a legal statement, formal, clear cold as steel. The language cut straight through pattern of coercion, financial abuse, and physical assault. No embellishment, just facts. Lisa's article dropped 3 hours later. The headline was "Direct Local Businessman Caught on Camera Assaulting Daughter Trust Fund, Misuse Alleged." Embedded at the top was the banquet hall footage, my father's hand across my face, the drag by the hair, Ethan clapping my mother, smiling. Within minutes, it was everywhere. I didn't check the comments. I didn't have to. Rachel called just before midnight. "3 clients have pulled out of your father's firm. Ethan's been placed on administrative leave." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, the house I grew up in, the family that built themselves on silence and image. They were crumbling. And I hadn't even said a word publicly yet. As I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A blocked number, just one line. "You think you've won." The lawsuit hit 2 days later. Rachel forwarded the notice with a short message. "They're going for defamation. We expected this." Attached was their version of the banquet hall video. Edited, cropped, muted in parts, and looped in others. In this version, my father looked calm. My voice was raised. It made me look erratic, unhinged, dangerous. "They want to control the narrative," Rachel said during our call. "They're betting public perception will turn before we can file our counter." And for some, it worked. The internet became a war zone. Messages flooded in some kind. Some cruel, others, just noise. I was called brave. I was called bitter. A truth teller. A liar. An attention seeker. A fraud. I stopped reading the comments after the 3rd time. Someone said I was lucky he only hit me once. That night, I sat in the dark with my phone face down on the coffee table, trying not to listen to the echo of my mother's laugh. The sound had lived in my head for years. But now it had company, my father's lawyer, their accusations, the endless edits cutting truth into fragments. The phone buzzed once, a blocked number. I turned it over. "You don't know what's coming." I didn't flinch. I just stared at it until the screen dimmed. Rachel called again the next morning. Her tone clipped and focused. "They've hired Michael Carter." I blinked. The corporate fixer. He's the guy people call when they want a scandal buried before it hits the press. He's good, Aurora. I leaned back against the kitchen counter. "So we go louder." There was a pause. Then Rachel said, "Good, because the real fight starts now." And I was already reaching for the next piece of evidence. The courtroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. My father sat at the plaintiff's table in a suit I knew cost more than my rent. Ethan beside him, pale and stiff. My mother didn't make eye contact. Rachel stood like she'd been born for this. She opened with the bank records precise. Undeniable transfers from my trust into shell companies. Then came the promotional invoices tied to Ethan's career. Finally, the voice recordings Tom helped recover casual conversations between my father and colleagues bragging about redirecting family assets. The opposing counsel tried to object, but Rachel was surgical. Every fact had a backup. Every backup had a signature. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and raised my right hand. My voice didn't shake. I told them what I remembered. Not just the slap, not just the dragging, but the years leading up to it. The insults in private, the erasure in public, the money I didn't know I lost until someone else cashed it in. They didn't just silence me. I said they spent me. The judge listened carefully, and when it ended, he looked directly at my father and said, "This court finds reasonable cause to open further investigation into possible criminal misuse of trust funds. Civil proceedings will be paused pending that review." Outside, the press had already gathered. Flashes, microphones, voices calling my name. I stood there, not as their daughter, not as the girl dragged across marble tile, but as myself. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is justice." And finally, I felt what it was like to mean every word I said. The full video went live 2 days later. No edits, no slow motion, no cuts to protect reputations, just truth. My father's voice sharp, then rising his hand across my face. The moment he grabbed my hair, my feet scraping against the floor, Ethan clapping in the background, my mother laughing like it was entertainment. It spread fast, faster than any press release, any article. It didn't need a caption. The silence of the room, the expressions of the guests, they said more than any headline could. By noon, Ethan issued a statement. He was resigning his post, citing mental health challenges and a desire to avoid distraction for his team. By evening, 3 sponsors had cut ties with my father's firm. A 4th pulled out the next morning. His name was now listed in articles beside words like allegations, abuse, and investigation. I watched it all unfold from my apartment coffee and hand blanket draped over my shoulders like armor. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, not peaceful. Not angry, just still like something had finally stopped spinning. Later that night, I opened the top drawer of my dresser and reached into the back. The necklace lay tangled between receipts and rubber bands, the chain delicate. The clasp still bent from where my mother had ripped it from my neck the night of the party. I held it up to the light. The pendant wasn't worth much, just a small silver circle etched with a wave pattern, a gift from someone who once told me I was stronger than I thought. I fastened it around my neck. It didn't feel like reclaiming the past. It felt like anchoring the present. And when I turned off the light and crawled into bed, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I was finally building. The auditorium lights dimmed as I stepped onto the stage. Not a courtroom, not a press conference, just a room full of women and a few men who knew what it meant to be broken quietly. I hadn't planned to speak. I was just supposed to listen. But when they asked if I wanted the mic, my legs moved before I could second-guess them. I didn't tell them everything just enough. I spoke about the moment I walked into a party and left with a bruised face and clarity. About the line between silence and surrender, about how one phone call didn't change my life, but what did was everything I chose after it. I used to think boundaries were walls. I said, now I know they're doors. You just have to be the one to lock them. Applause came gently, not the kind that demanded performance, but the kind that held space. Afterward, I made my way toward the exit. People stopped me, some to hug, some to whisper their own stories. I didn't need to say much. Most of them already knew what I meant. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. I pulled my coat tighter around me and reached for my phone. A new message blinked on the screen. Unknown number? Thank you. Because of you, I left too. Aurora learns that boundaries are not walls, but doors she can choose to lock. Her experience at the banquet hall, enduring her father's violence and her family's betrayal, teaches her that silence enables abuse while action reclaims power. By documenting evidence exposing their financial misconduct and speaking her truth, she dismantles their carefully crafted image. The lesson is clear: healing begins with confronting pain, not concealing it. Aurora's journey shows that courage lies in choosing to act, making one call, gathering proof, and standing firm, transforming her from a silenced victim to a force for justice.
Standing outside Mrs. Patterson's kitchen window, I could hear every word of my mother's latest character assassination. It was a familiar routine Thursday afternoon coffee with the neighbor, where my life choices became the entertainment. My daughter is such a disappointment, she said with that exaggerated sigh she'd perfected. 31 years old and still playing with computers all day. No husband, no children, living in that tiny apartment downtown. Tiny apartment. If only she knew. I'd stopped by to drop off the mortgage payment I'd been secretly covering for the past 6 months. Mom and Dad thought their mysterious payment assistance program from the bank was some kind of government benefit for seniors. In reality, it was me preventing them from losing the house they'd lived in for 25 years. She could have been anything, Mom continued. Doctor, lawyer, teacher. Instead, she wastes her time with those silly computer games. Computer games. That's what she called the software development company I'd built from scratch. The one that had revolutionized mobile gaming and generated over $60 million in revenue last year. At least your daughter is a nurse, Mom said to Mrs. Patterson. That's a real career. Mine just sits in front of a screen all day. I decided I'd heard enough and slipped the envelope through their mail slot. The check inside would cover this month's mortgage, property taxes, and utilities, just like the previous 6 months. They'd never know it came from their disappointing daughter. But last week everything changed. Last week she called. I need somewhere to stay, your dad left. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my home office reviewing code for our latest game release, when my phone buzzed with Mom's contact. Sophie? It's Mom. Her voice was different. Smaller. The confident disapproval I was used to had been replaced by something I'd never heard before. Desperation. Mom? What's wrong? It's almost midnight. Your father left. I set down my coffee and gave her my full attention. What do you mean left? He moved out this afternoon. Took his clothes, his golf clubs, everything. Left a note saying he needed space to figure things out. Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I don't know what to do, Sophie. I can't afford the house payments on my own. My part-time job at the library barely covers groceries. If only she knew that I'd been covering those house payments for months. Where will you go? I was hoping. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye about your choices, but I need somewhere to stay while I figure this out. Just temporarily. Of course, Mom. You can stay with me. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll drive over in the morning. Actually, let me send you my address. I moved a few months ago. Moved? Why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked about my life unless it was to criticize it. It's downtown. I'll text you the address and parking instructions. After hanging up, I looked around my 4,200 square foot penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. This was going to be interesting. The next morning I was reviewing acquisition proposals for 2 smaller gaming studios when the concierge called. Miss Chin, there's a Margaret Williams here to see you. Should I send her up? Yes, thank you. I walked to the private elevator and pressed the button to bring it to the 47th floor. Through my security system, I could see Mom in the lobby, looking around with wide eyes at the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and abstract art pieces that decorated the Meridian Tower's entrance. The Meridian Tower was the most expensive residential building in the city. Only 12 units occupied the top 6 floors, each selling for between $8 and $15 million. I'd bought mine 18 months ago, paying cash as a celebration of my company's first major acquisition. She took the elevator to the 47th floor of downtown's most expensive building. I watched through the security monitor as Mom stepped into the elevator, checking the paper with my address twice. Her expression was confused as the elevator rose higher and higher, past the 10th floor, past the 20th, past the 30th. When it finally stopped at 47, I could see her looking at the button panel as if there had been some mistake. When the doors opened to my penthouse, I was waiting in the foyer when the elevator doors slid open. Mom stepped out slowly, her overnight bag clutched in one hand, her mouth slightly open as she took in the soaring ceilings, the Italian marble flooring and the massive windows that framed the city below. "Sophie." "Hi, Mom." "Come in." She didn't move. This is your apartment?" "It's home." "But how? Why don't you come in? I'll make coffee and we can talk." She followed me through the foyer into the main living area, her head swiveling to take in every detail. The custom furniture, the original artwork, the kitchen island that cost more than most people's cars. "Sophie, I don't understand. How can you afford this place?" "The same way I afford everything else. I work." "But you work with computers." "I own a software development company." "You own it." "I founded it 7 years ago. We develop mobile games and entertainment software." She sank into one of my white leather sofas, still clutching her bag. "Games. Our most popular game has been downloaded over 200 million times. We have 43 employees and offices in 3 cities." "I had no idea." "Because you never asked." She flinched at that, but it was true. In all the years I'd been building my company, growing my team and establishing myself in the industry, she'd never once inquired about the specifics of my work. "I thought you were just playing around with computers." "I was playing around with computers when I was 12. I've been running a business since I was 24. I walked to the kitchen and started making coffee, giving her time to process. Through the reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator, I could see her looking around with new eyes. "Sophie, this place must cost more than most people make in a year." "How much more?" I turned to face her. "Mom, do you really want to know?" "Yes. The mortgage on this penthouse is $28,000 a month." Her face went white. $28,000? Per month? "I don't have a mortgage. I paid cash." She stared at me for a long moment. "You paid cash for a multimillion-dollar apartment?" $8.4 million to be exact." 8.4. She couldn't finish the sentence. I brought her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Mom, I've been trying to tell you about my success for years, but you were never interested in hearing about it. I just thought, when you didn't go to medical school, when you didn't get married, you thought I was wasting my life." "Yes. What if I told you that my company is worth over $100 million? I'd say that's impossible." I pulled out my phone and showed her our company website, Pixel Dream Studios. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the list of games we'd developed, the awards we'd won, the press coverage we'd received. "This is your company?" "I'm the founder and CEO. But these games, I've heard of some of these. My friends' grandchildren play them." "Probably. We have games in the top 10 downloads in 47 countries." She continued scrolling, her expression shifting from disbelief to something approaching awe. "Sophie, I had no idea. I thought you were struggling." "Why would you think that?" "Because you don't drive a fancy car, you don't wear expensive clothes." "Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I built this company because I love what I do, not to impress people." "But why didn't you tell us?" "I tried to. Every time I mentioned a business milestone or a new contract, you'd change the subject or make a comment about how I should focus on finding a husband instead." She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "I'm a terrible mother." "You're not terrible. You're just limited in your perspective." "Limited?" "You grew up in a generation where success for women looked very different. Marriage, children, traditional careers. You couldn't see that I was successful because my success didn't fit your template. So you've been hiding all of this?" "I haven't been hiding anything. I just stopped trying to share it with people who weren't interested." She looked around the penthouse again, this time taking in details she'd missed before. The awards on the bookshelf, the framed magazine covers featuring me and my team, the photographs from industry conferences and product launches. "Sophie, can I ask you something?" Of course. Are you happy? The question caught me off guard. What? Are you happy? Living alone in this beautiful place, running your company, having all this success. I thought about it for a moment. Most of the time, yes. I love my work, I love my team, I love the problems we solve and the entertainment we create. But I do wish I had someone to share it with. Not a husband necessarily, but family who understood and celebrated what I've accomplished. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. For what? For not being that person. For not supporting your dreams. For telling the neighbors you were a disappointment when you're actually what? Extraordinary. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing this shift in our relationship. Mom, can I ask you something now? Anything. Why did Dad really leave? She sighed deeply. Money. It's always been about money with him. He retired 2 years ago expecting to maintain the same lifestyle, but his pension and social security weren't enough. When I suggested cutting back on expenses, getting a smaller house, maybe selling the boat, he wasn't interested. He said I was being negative, that something would work out. Then last week he found out about some investment opportunity. His golf buddy's brother has some kind of business venture that needs investors. How much does he want to invest? Everything. He wanted to take out a second mortgage on the house, cash out his remaining retirement accounts, borrow against the life insurance policy. Mom, that sounds like a scam. I know. When I refused to sign the papers, he accused me of holding him back from financial freedom. So he left. He said he'd find someone who believed in his vision. I shook my head. I'm sorry he put you in that position. The truth is, Sophie, I'm relieved. I've been worried about our finances for months, but he wouldn't hear any practical solutions. What kind of practical solutions? Getting a smaller house, maybe moving to a retirement community, living within our actual means instead of the means we wish we had. Mom, can I tell you something? Yes. You haven't been living within your means for 6 months. What do you mean? I've been paying your mortgage, property taxes, and utilities. She stared at me. What? That payment assistance program you thought came from the bank? That was me. But how did you? I bought your mortgage from the bank when you fell behind on payments. You've been paying me, you just didn't know it. Sophie, why? Because despite everything, I love you. And I didn't want you to lose your home. She started crying then, not the delicate tears from earlier but deep body-shaking sobs. I don't deserve this kindness. Mom, you're my mother. Of course you deserve it. But I've been so awful to you. So dismissive of everything you've worked for. You've been operating from your own fears and limitations. That doesn't make you awful, it makes you human. What kind of person doesn't know their own daughter is a millionaire? The kind of person who was so focused on what I wasn't doing that she couldn't see what I was accomplishing. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive. But I do want things to be different going forward. Different how? I want you to be genuinely interested in my life. Not just as a way to find things to criticize, but because you actually care about what I'm doing. I do care. I've always cared, You just wanted me to care about different things. Yes. Mom, I'm never going to be the daughter who gets married in her 20s and has 3 kids and joins the PTA. But I am the daughter who built a company that employs dozens of people, creates entertainment that brings joy to millions, and generates enough wealth to take care of her family when they need it. That's more than enough. That's incredible. So no more telling the neighbors I'm a disappointment? She laughed through her tears. God, no. I'm going to tell everyone you're a CEO living in a penthouse downtown. And no more suggestions that I should give up my career to find a husband? Never again. Good. Now let me show you to your room. You can stay as long as you need to figure out your next steps. I led her down the hallway to the guest suite, which was larger than most people's entire apartments. It had its own bathroom, walk-in closet, and sitting area with windows overlooking the river. This is the guest room? This is your room for as long as you want it. Sophie, I can't afford to pay rent on a place like this. You're not a tenant, Mom. You're my mother. This is family. That evening we ordered dinner from my favorite Thai restaurant and ate it at the dining room table that seated 12 but had only ever hosted business meetings. It was the first meal my mother and I had shared without tension in years. Can I ask about your father? I said as we finished our pad thai. What about him? Do you want him to come back? He thought about it for a long time. The man I married 40 years ago, yes. The man who left last week, no. What's the difference? The man I married was content with what we had. He appreciated simple things, worked hard, and prioritized family over money. This new version of him is always chasing some get-rich-quick scheme, always convinced that he deserves more than he's earned. People change. They do. And sometimes not for the better. What will you do? I honestly don't know. I love him, but I can't live with someone who's willing to risk everything we've built for the chance of having more. You don't have to decide tonight. No, but I should probably decide soon. He's been calling. What does he say? That he's made a terrible mistake. That he wants to come home. That he'll forget about the investment opportunity. Do you believe him? Until the next opportunity comes along. We cleaned up dinner together and I showed her how to use the smart home system to control the lights, temperature, and entertainment system. She was fascinated by the technology, asking questions I'd never heard from her before. How did you learn to do all this? She asked as I demonstrated the voice commands. Trial and error mostly. And a lot of reading. I mean the business side. How did you know how to start a company? I didn't. I just started building games and figured out the business part as I went along. That must have been terrifying. It was. But it was also exciting. Every day brought new challenges and new possibilities. I wish I'd been more supportive. You can be supportive now. How? By being genuinely interested. Ask me about my projects, meet my team, come to our product launches. You'd want me there? Of course. You're my mother. I'd like that very much. 3 months later, Mom was still living with me, but it was no longer a temporary arrangement. She'd filed for divorce from Dad, who had indeed invested everything in his golf buddy's brother's scheme and lost it all. She'd also started working part-time as my executive assistant, helping manage my calendar and correspondence. Your 2 p.m. meeting is here, she said, poking her head into my home office. Thanks, Mom. Can you set them up in the conference room? Already done. Coffee, water, and those chocolate croissants you like. She'd become invaluable, not just as an assistant but as someone who understood the business and could represent the company professionally. More importantly, she'd become the supportive mother I'd always wanted. Oh, and Sophie? Yes. Mrs. Patterson called to see if you'd speak at her grandson's career day. What did you tell her? That my daughter, the CEO, would be honored to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. I smiled. Perfect answer. I'm learning. Yes, you are. The best part was watching her discover her own capabilities. At 63, she was learning new technologies, developing business skills, and finding purpose in work that mattered. She'd gone from being someone who defined herself entirely through her relationships to someone building her own identity and career. Sophie, she said one evening as we were reviewing quarterly reports together, I need to apologize again. For what now? For wasting so many years being disappointed in you instead of being proud of you. Mom, we've been through this. I know, but I keep thinking about all the milestones I missed. All the celebrations we should have had. All the times I should have been your biggest cheerleader instead of your biggest critic. We can't change the past. No, but we can make sure the future is different. It already is different. Good. Because I have some ideas for the company Christmas party, and I think we should definitely get those chocolate fountains you were considering. I laughed. Chocolate fountains it is. And maybe we should invite Mrs. Patterson. I've been telling her so much about the business, she's dying to see where her neighbor's daughter works. The neighbor's daughter who used to be such a disappointment? The neighbor's daughter who turned out to be the most successful person on the block, and whose mother is finally smart enough to appreciate her. I love you too, Mom. I love you, Sophie. And I'm proud of you. I should have been saying that for years. You're saying it now. That's what matters. As I watched her review our latest revenue projections with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for criticizing my life choices, I realized that sometimes the best family transformations happen when we stop trying to change each other and start trying to understand each other instead. And sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see what was right in front of you all along. The chandeliers in my parents' dining room cast a warm glow over the mahogany table that had been in our family for 3 generations. Crystal glasses caught the light, reflecting rainbows across the white tablecloth that my mother had spent hours pressing to perfection. The room looked like something from a magazine spread about elegant holiday entertaining, which was exactly the image my parents had always worked so hard to maintain. This Christmas dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The whole family was gathered for the first time in 2 years. My parents, my older brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer, my younger sister Ashley with her fiancé David and me. The table was laden with all the traditional dishes. Honey-glazed ham, roasted turkey, mashed potatoes with real butter, green bean casserole, and my mother's famous cranberry sauce that took her 3 days to prepare properly. But beneath the festive atmosphere I could feel the tension that had been building for months. Ever since I'd made my announcement about changing career paths, my family had been treating me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin against their expectations. "Elena, could you pass the gravy?" my mother asked, her voice carrying that particular strain I'd learned to recognize when she was trying to maintain appearances while internally seething about something. I handed her the crystal gravy boat, part of the wedding china set that had been passed down through her family, and watched as she carefully ladled the rich brown sauce over her mashed potatoes. Everything about my mother's movements was precise, controlled, designed to convey the image of a woman who had everything in her life perfectly arranged. "So," my father said, setting down his wine glass with a deliberate clink, "I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room." The conversations around the table quieted. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. Ashley's hand found David's under the table. My mother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What elephant would that be, Dad?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what was coming. Robert Castellanos had built his reputation and his fortune on being direct and decisive. He'd started with a small construction company 30 years ago and turned it into one of the most successful commercial development firms in the region. He didn't believe in subtlety or diplomatic approaches when he thought someone needed to hear an uncomfortable truth. "Your decision to throw away everything we've worked to build for you," he said, his voice carrying the edge that had intimidated business competitors and family members alike for decades. "Your choice to abandon a promising career in corporate law to chase some ridiculous dream about nonprofit work." I set down my fork carefully, trying to maintain my composure. "I didn't abandon anything, Dad. I made a career change that aligns with my values and interests." "Values?" Marcus scoffed from across the table. "Since when is financial irresponsibility a value?" My brother had always been the perfect son. Harvard MBA, successful investment banker, married to the daughter of another prominent business family. He'd followed every step of the path my parents had laid out for him, and he couldn't understand why I would choose differently. "Elena, dear," my mother said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness she used when she was about to deliver a particularly cutting observation, "we've supported your little volunteer phase. But don't you think it's time to be realistic about your future?" "My little volunteer phase?" I repeated, feeling my temper beginning to rise despite my efforts to stay calm. "Working for that legal aid organization," Ashley chimed in. "I mean, it's nice that you want to help people, but you can't build a real life on that kind of salary." My younger sister had always been eager to align herself with whatever position would win her the most approval from our parents. She'd chosen a safe career in marketing for a family friend's company and was planning a wedding that would cost more than most people made in 2 years. "Actually," I said, "I'm not working for a legal aid organization anymore." The table fell silent. This was news to all of them. "What do you mean?" my father asked, his voice taking on a suspicious tone. I took a sip of my wine, a bottle of expensive Cabernet that my father had selected from his personal collection, and smiled. "I mean, I started my own firm 3 months ago. Castellanos Legal Advocacy. We specialize in civil rights law and social justice cases." The reaction was immediate and explosive. "You started your own firm?" my mother gasped. "Without discussing it with us. Without asking for our advice or guidance. You used our family name?" Marcus demanded. "For some bleeding heart legal practice?" "Elena, this is exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making we've been worried about," Ashley said, shaking her head in disapproval. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You had no right to use the Castellanos name for your amateur legal practice. Our family has a reputation in this community, and I won't have you damaging it with your misguided activism." "Misguided activism?" I repeated, feeling my carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "Is that what you call fighting for people's rights?" "I call it naive idealism that's going to destroy any chance you have at a serious legal career," my father shot back. Do you have any idea how much money and influence I've invested in your education and professional development? Law school, internships, connections, all wasted so you can play savior to people who can't pay their bills. Jennifer, who rarely spoke up during family arguments, cleared her throat diplomatically. Maybe Elena just needs some time to get this out of her system. She could always go back to corporate law later. There won't be a later, my father said firmly. Not if she continues down this path. Elena, I'm giving you one chance to end this foolishness. Close down this so-called firm, apologize to the partners at Morrison & Associates for leaving without proper notice, and we can pretend this whole episode never happened. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to close my law firm and go back to defending corporate interests? I want you to grow up and accept your responsibilities as a member of this family, he replied coldly. And if I don't? My father leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening into the look that had intimidated countless business adversaries over the years. Then you're disinherited. Effective immediately. No more family money, no more trust fund, no more safety net. You want to play at being a social justice warrior? You can do it without our support. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Ashley exchanged triumphant glances. They'd always resented the fact that my trust fund was slightly larger than theirs, a consequence of me being the first grandchild and therefore the recipient of additional contributions from our grandparents. Robert, my mother said softly, though her tone suggested she was fully supportive of his ultimatum, don't you think that's a bit extreme? Not at all, my father replied. Elena needs to learn that actions have consequences. If she wants to reject everything this family stands for, then she can do it without benefiting from everything this family has built. Marcus was grinning openly now. Maybe this will finally teach her some financial responsibility. Ashley nodded enthusiastically. I mean, it's not like she can actually make a living with her little nonprofit law firm. She'll come back to reality soon enough. I looked around the table at my family, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They weren't just disagreeing with my career choice. They were actively trying to sabotage it, to force me back into the mold they'd created for me. Well, my father demanded. What's it going to be? Are you ready to act like an adult, or do I need to call my lawyer tomorrow morning? I calmly sipped my wine and smiled. Check your bank account, Dad. The request caught him completely off guard. What? Your bank account, I repeated. Check the balance. My father's expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. Elena, this isn't the time for games. I'm not playing games, I said serenely. I'm serious. Check your account. The main operating account for Castellanos Development. Something in my tone must have convinced him, because he pulled out his phone with obvious irritation. The rest of the family watched as he navigated to his banking app, probably expecting to find some minor discrepancy that I'd somehow discovered. What he found instead made his face go completely white. That's impossible, he whispered, staring at his phone screen. What's impossible? Marcus demanded, leaning over to look at the phone. My father's hands were shaking as he showed the screen to my mother. Her sharp intake of breath was audible across the table. The account balance is 0, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean 0? Ashley asked, her voice rising with panic. I set down my wine glass and smiled at their shocked faces. I mean exactly what I said. The main operating account for Castellanos Development, the one that holds your working capital, payroll reserves, and operational funds, now has a balance of $0.00. The chaos that erupted around the table was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus was demanding to see the phone. Ashley was asking rapid-fire questions about what this meant for the family finances. Jennifer was suggesting they call the bank immediately to report fraud. My father, meanwhile, was frantically calling up other banking apps, checking investment accounts and business reserves. With each screen he pulled up, his face grew paler. Elena, my mother said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, what have you done? I haven't done anything illegal, I assured her. I simply exercised the financial power of attorney that Dad gave me 6 months ago when he was hospitalized with his heart attack. The memory of that terrifying week in March came flooding back. My father had been rushed to the hospital with what doctors initially thought might be a massive heart attack. While he was unconscious in the ICU, My mother had been overwhelmed trying to manage both his medical care and the urgent business decisions that couldn't wait for his recovery. I'd been the one to step up. I'd taken leave from my job at Morrison & Associates to handle the most pressing business matters, working 18-hour days to keep Castellanos' development running smoothly. I'd coordinated with project managers, dealt with client concerns, and made the financial decisions that kept the company operational during the crisis. When my father had finally recovered enough to handle legal matters, he'd insisted on formalizing the arrangement by giving me power of attorney over the business accounts. Just in case something like this happens again, he'd said. I need to know someone I trust can keep the company running. You gave her power of attorney? Marcus demanded, turning on my father with obvious fury. Why didn't you give it to me? Because you were in London closing that merger deal, my father replied weakly. Elena was the one who kept everything together. She earned my trust. Earned your trust so she could steal from us? Ashley shrieked. I didn't steal anything, I said firmly. Every transaction I made was completely legal and within the scope of the authority Dad gave me. Then where is our money? My mother demanded. I pulled out my own phone and opened up a document I'd been preparing for months. The funds have been redistributed according to a comprehensive financial restructuring plan that I developed and implemented over the past several weeks. I handed my phone to my father so he could see the detailed spreadsheet I'd created. 40% of the liquid assets have been transferred to a trust fund for displaced workers. I began, watching my family's faces as the implications sank in. These are families who lost their jobs when Castellanos' development demolished low-income housing to build luxury condos. My mother's hand flew to her throat. You gave our money to strangers? 25% has been donated to legal aid organizations that provide services to people who can't afford traditional legal representation, I continued. 15% has been allocated to environmental restoration projects in communities where Castellanos' development's construction practices caused ecological damage. Elena, stop, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. 10% has been used to establish the Castellanos Social Justice Fellowship, which will provide grants to young lawyers who want to work in public interest law, I said, reaching the end of my list. And the remaining 10% has been transferred to my business account to fund the expansion of Castellanos' legal advocacy. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear the sound of cars passing on the street outside, could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, Marcus found his voice. You stole everything. You took our entire family fortune and gave it away to your pet causes. I redistributed resources that were being used to perpetuate systemic inequality, I corrected. Castellanos' development made its fortune by displacing poor families and destroying communities. I simply ensured that some of those profits went back to the people who were harmed. You destroyed us, Ashley whispered, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to your own family? I looked at my younger sister, the woman who had just been celebrating the idea of me being cut off from family money, and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. You want to know how I could do this? I asked quietly. I could do it because 6 months ago, when Dad was lying in that hospital bed, I realized that our family's wealth was built on a foundation of exploitation and harm. Every luxury condo we built meant a dozen families lost their affordable housing. Every commercial development meant a community lost its green space. I gestured around the elegant dining room with its expensive furnishings and artwork. All of this was paid for by making other people's lives worse. And I decided I couldn't be part of that anymore. My father was staring at the spreadsheet on my phone, his face gray with shock and what might have been the beginning of understanding. Elena, some of these donations, the Environmental Restoration Fund, the Displaced Worker Trust, these are addressing problems that our company created. Exactly, I said. I spent months researching every major project Castellanos' development had completed over the past decade. I calculated the social and environmental costs of our business practices. And then I allocated funds to begin addressing the damage we'd done. But you've bankrupted us, my mother said, her voice hollow with disbelief. I've liquidated the cash reserves, I corrected. The company still owns substantial real estate and has ongoing contracts worth millions. Castellanos' development isn't going out of business. It just can't continue operating the way it has been. I pulled up another document on my phone. In fact, I've developed a comprehensive business plan for transitioning the company towards sustainable development practices. Affordable housing projects, green construction methods, community partnerships that benefit rather than displace existing residents. Marcus was shaking his head in amazement. You're insane. Do you have any idea how much money you just threw away? We could have been set for life. We were already set for life, I pointed out. And so were our children and their children. The question is whether we wanted that security to come at the expense of other people's basic human rights. David, Ashley's fiancé, finally spoke up. He'd been silent throughout the entire confrontation, but now he looked pale and shaken. Ashley, maybe we should postpone the wedding. If your family is having financial difficulties. We're not having financial difficulties, Ashley snapped at him. Elena just temporarily moved some money around. Dad will fix this. He'll get our money back. But my father was still studying the spreadsheet, and his expression was thoughtful rather than angry. Elena, this trust fund for displaced workers, how does it work? It provides temporary housing assistance, job training, and small business loans for families who were forced to relocate due to development projects, I explained. The goal is to help them rebuild their lives and find stable housing they can afford. And the environmental restoration? Soil remediation, tree planting, creation of community gardens and green spaces in neighborhoods where development projects removed natural areas, I said. Plus funding for renewable energy installations in low-income housing. My father was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been pride mixed with regret. How long have you been planning this? He asked. Since the day you gave me the power of attorney, I admitted. I started researching our company's impact and realized I had an opportunity to do something meaningful with the wealth that had been built on causing harm. You planned this entire confrontation, my mother accused. You knew we'd try to pressure you about your career choice. I hoped you wouldn't, I said honestly. I hoped that when I told you about starting my own firm, you'd be proud that I was using my law degree to help people. But when you threatened to disinherit me for choosing social justice over corporate profits, well, it seemed like the perfect time to show you that your money doesn't have the power over me that you thought it did. The rest of Christmas dinner passed in a haze of shocked conversations, angry accusations, and gradual acceptance of the new reality. Marcus and Ashley remained furious, convinced that I'd committed some kind of unforgivable betrayal. My mother alternated between horror at the financial loss and grudging admiration for the scope of what I'd accomplished. But my father surprised me. As the evening wound down and people began gathering their coats to leave, he pulled me aside for a private conversation in his study. Elena, he said, settling into the leather chair behind his desk, I need to understand something. When you made these donations, these transfers, were you trying to destroy our family's financial security? No, Dad, I said honestly. I was trying to transform it into something I could be proud of. He nodded slowly. The business plan you mentioned for transitioning the company towards sustainable practices, how detailed is it? I pulled out my tablet and showed him the comprehensive proposal I'd been working on for months. 64 pages. Market analysis, financial projections, case studies of successful sustainable development companies, proposed partnerships with community organizations. My father spent the next hour reading through my business plan, asking detailed questions about costs, timelines, and potential challenges. His questions were sharp and informed, the same kinds of analytical inquiries he'd always made when evaluating new business opportunities. This could actually work, he said finally, looking up from the tablet with something like amazement. The profit margins would be lower initially, but the long-term sustainability and community goodwill could make it more profitable than our current model. That's what my research suggests, I agreed. And you've been working on this alone? While managing your legal career and starting your own firm. I had help from some consultants, I admitted. Urban planning experts, environmental scientists, community organizers. People who understand how to build developments that strengthen communities instead of destroying them. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Elena, what you did tonight, taking our money and redistributing it without permission. That was theft. You know that, right? It was redistribution of wealth that had been accumulated through harmful business practices, I corrected. And I had legal authority to make those transfers. Legally, yes. Ethically. He paused, considering. Ethically, you were using our family's money to address problems that our family's business had created. That's one way to look at it. Is there another way? I met his eyes directly. You could look at it as your daughter using the education and opportunities you provided to become the kind of person who fights for justice instead of perpetuating inequality. The silence stretched between us for several minutes. Finally, my father smiled. A real smile, not the forced expression he'd been wearing all evening. Your mother is going to need time to adjust to this new reality, he said. Marcus and Ashley, they may never forgive you. I know. But Elena, I want you to know something. What you did tonight required more courage and conviction than anything I've ever done in business. I built a fortune by being smarter and more ruthless than my competitors. You're trying to build something better than a fortune. 3 months later, I received a phone call that I hadn't expected. Elena? It's Dad. I've been thinking about that business plan you showed me. Oh. I'd like to implement it. The transition to sustainable development practices. Would you be willing to work with me on restructuring Castellanos development? I was sitting in my new office. A small but bright space in a renovated building that housed several nonprofit organizations and social justice advocates. Through my window, I could see the community garden that had been planted with funds from the environmental restoration project I'd established. As a consultant? I asked. As a partner, my father said. 50-50 ownership. You handle the legal and community relations side, I handle the construction and business management. We build developments that help communities instead of destroying them. I thought about the offer for a long moment. What about Marcus and Ashley? What about Mom? Marcus has started his own investment firm. He's actually doing quite well without the family money. Turns out your brother is smarter than we gave him credit for. Ashley postponed her wedding, but she and David are working things out. She's talking about going back to school for urban planning. And Mom? My father chuckled. Your mother has become the most effective fundraiser the Displaced Worker Trust has ever seen. Turns out she has a talent for convincing wealthy people to donate to worthy causes. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, I stood in the lobby of the first affordable housing complex built by the new Castellanos Community Development. The building was beautiful, energy efficient, surrounded by green space, designed in partnership with the families who would live there. My father stood beside me, looking prouder than I'd ever seen him. You know, he said, I spent 30 years building a company that made money by making other people's lives worse. It feels good to build something that makes people's lives better. The plaque by the entrance read, Castellanos Community Gardens Apartments. Built in partnership with the Morrison Street Neighborhood Association. Dedicated to the principle that everyone deserves a safe, affordable home in a thriving community. It wasn't the inheritance my family had planned to leave me. But it was the legacy I was proud to carry forward.